So Rob, we've heard some of those in the discussions that we've been having already today, that there's a lot happening at the moment and change is coming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Change can be coming, and following from Julia's, I think quite a pivotal conversation around exactly what is happening in the energy sector. We in EY have had, there's a number of things. A lot of our clients, and I probably should say actually just sort of talk a little bit about EY. Sometimes I get asked, why are you here at a conference like this? Because you're a big organisation, don't you deal with the big suppliers and big companies? And we do. So our energy business is a big business. We, in the UK alone, around 400 million of revenue for us across oil and gas, mining and metals, and power and utilities. But also we have a thriving, and actually one of our biggest growing markets is what we call the private mid-market, which is really around new entrants, startups, scale-ups, etc. So it's a really important sort of sector for us. But within energy, a lot of the conversations, particularly with investors as well, we've had, and Julia talked about how much money has gone into the renewable sector over the last decade. It really has been a huge area of influx of investment, and those investors, I think the numbers are insane in terms of 300 billion a year for many years globally. That money is now looking for the next, what's next? So we've had a lot of investment in wind and solar. Where's it coming next? And so we've done some research to try and not necessarily predict what's going to happen, but actually talk about when it's going to happen. So we talked about tipping points, thought around actually we've modelled and tried to understand when do we think the big changes are going to come around solar, PV penetration, home generation, EV charging, etc., which will really change the energy landscape.
Mm-hmm. And probably the first one of those to talk about is sort of consumer behaviour. So if we take a look at the sort of consumer market at the moment, and particularly in generation, probably people are, the main way that consumers are doing their own self-generation would be solar power. But it's still fairly sort of luxury, it's fairly expensive for consumers. Is that going to change? Well, it's obviously going to change as the technology develops, but when is that going to change? And what's going to drive that change?
Well, I suppose affordability is one thing that will drive it, and we've seen battery costs come down substantially over the last sort of 3-5 years, and we'll see that again. So for 2025, I think predictions are we'll see battery costs come down by 60%, solar PV panels will come down by 40%. So we're sort of predicting by 2022, we'll have cost parity between self-generation solar and battery and getting your power through the grid. I don't think that means that we're all going to run out and put solar PV panels on the roof, because maybe some of the people in the room have already got them, and maybe as an energy geek I might go and get it, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be the tipping point, just cost parity. It needs something else to drive that real consumer uptake.
Mm-hmm. And what is that to drive that consumer uptake? What's needed?
Well, looking around different markets, some of it would say we need more incentives, we need government policy. In the UK, obviously, we've retreated a little bit from that, so from subsidies and feed-in tariffs, etc. But I think the big tipping, the sort of accelerator is going to be EV and the EV market and penetration. And I think that's where it fundamentally changes consumer behaviour. Because on if you have a driveway and your front lawn, you're going to have a fairly substantial battery, which is going to put a battery in everyone's home. You don't have to put something on your wall, you're just going to have it in the front of your house.
And pretty much on EVs, every large vehicle manufacturer has committed to producing electric vehicles, whether in a hybrid or fully electric capacity over the next few years. It's definitely the way that the market is going, and their commitments are fully there. But really, sort of when we get to a stage of more electric vehicles out there in the real world, like when is that going to be?
So again, these are all great questions. Sound like I'm a doyen here. You've got all the answers. I haven't, but we're trying to give some guidance around when these things might be, and it changes depending on where you are in the world. So it depends on policy. There's a whole bunch of variables that drive this. But we're predicting in the UK, there's a couple of fundamentals need to be in place for that tipping point to happen. Cost parity. So it needs to be economically viable for you to buy an EV. And secondly, it needs to have performance parity as well with an ICE car. And we're sort of at that point now in terms of anyone's driven an electric vehicle. I think the biggest tipping point is they're actually fun to drive. They're actually good fun. I mean, don't know why they make them look so ugly, and there's sort of obsession with putting a blue line next to everything and sort of hubcaps that look like trailer tops. But the cars are better, they're more fun to drive. But also with increasing government subsidies, we'll see increasing rollout. We think by 2025, we'll start seeing a proper tipping point around EV penetration in the UK.
And obviously that requires a lot of infrastructure, and I know that government is doing a lot of work around increasing EV charging systems in the UK here, but is there enough being done, and how do we sort of accelerate that as an industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, because ultimately not enough's being done, and I sort of echo what Juliet was saying before around the problem's not on the generation side. You know, we've got capacity. The challenge is going to be around basically charging points and how you get charging points out. And not everyone's got off-street parking. It's one thing having charging points in service stations, but what about when you're in the office or at home and so forth? And that becomes quite difficult around policy. People are looking for guidance around how what will be in place to encourage investment around the rollout of charging points. And that's definitely something which I think all parties need to come together and talk more about, because without that, we're going to get to a situation where we've got a supply and demand problem.
And on that issue, I guess, with the way that vehicles are set up at the moment, most people don't drive their cars for most of the time. They sit around doing nothing at all. You're either at work and it's in the car park, or at home and it's on the drive. What does that sort of model mean for the grid and for sort of the capacity issues around electric vehicles when we're talking at a scale of millions of electric vehicles out there?
Well, there's a lot written about this already, I suppose, but you're absolutely right in terms of the challenge is vehicles will sit unmovable not moving for large periods of the day, and the idea being that we've got capacity in the electricity network, so if we can do charging overnight and so forth, when the car's not being used, then we've got capacity in the system to do it. But in order for that to happen, it has to be very easy for consumers to enable that. So that's where we're going to see the new models, and I'm desperate to hear what some of the startups are going to talk about today. Around new business models are going to be evolved to enable that.
And what sort of spaces do you see for these potential new business models in the area? Like, what's missing at the moment?
I suppose the tech is missing to a degree, but also I suppose it's the bringing a compelling customer proposition I don't have to care too much about. I'm trying to think what was said before around the eco warriors and the eco, I can't remember the other phrase, warriors, eco warriors. It's the eco warriors that you need to sort of get over the line with make it easy for me, give me a home energy management system that I don't need to care about, I don't need to interact with necessarily. And I think they're the models that need to evolve and will really drive the tipping point.
And we briefly touched upon sort of automation in the previous talk. And how much of that do you think is actually going to really make a difference to consumers and their behaviour around energy? Is it something that can be made more exciting for consumers, or does it need to be?
I'm not sure. I mean, this is an energy audience, so I've got to be careful what I say, but I'm not sure energy needs to be exciting. Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges we have this perverse situation at the moment where we've got amazing choice in the market, and now the government's still feeling a need, or regulators still feeling a need to intervene into the market to change behaviour. Unfortunately, I don't think consumers, whilst they have an interest, it's not a great enough interest to force them into action. So we do need tools. We do need to make it very easy for consumers to interact. I might, as a consumer, want to support green energy. I don't want to use fossil fuel. I want all my energy source from renewables. I have my car out the front, but I'm not really going to want to interact on a regular basis to manage all that. I just want that all to happen seamlessly. And that's really where we've got to get to.
Yeah, and what drives that change? And does that have to come from the companies working within this space, or does consumers just need to sort of adopt the technology from other areas and be familiar with these sorts of systems?
Well, I think it's going to come from all different areas. So one of the big challenges for some of the traditional utilities is the manufacturers, the motor vehicle manufacturers, are just moving straight into this space. So will it be your current energy supplier who starts managing that home energy system, it doesn't necessarily have to be. And you look at some of the large oil and gas companies that are coming into this space, and as I said, the big vehicle manufacturers as well. They have to move. They are, as you say, they're changing their production to go EV. They have to. They've got new regulations coming in from the EU just a couple of weeks ago around emission targets. So that is happening. Whether from an energy industry, whether the energy industry is ready to take that up is probably a real question. So it will happen. It won't necessarily happen with the same people who are doing energy at the moment.
Yeah, and from sort of your experience, how much buy-in are you seeing from these players that are not traditionally in the energy industry but are coming into it, like the EV manufacturers? How willing are they to be working with more traditional energy industry companies? Are they looking to startups as well? Absolutely.
I mean, I think, I can't remember who was saying it this morning around sort of the really interesting conversation this morning around innovation culture. My observation would be a lot of the large utilities have gone through that process of we need to innovate, so we'll set up our innovation lab. We'll invest loads of money into the innovation space that actually hasn't delivered anything because it's very hard to innovate in a large organisation and you haven't got that innovation culture. So therefore, now the next iteration is actually a realisation that we're going to have to partner. Now, I think the fear might be is that realisation come a little bit too late for some of the large energy companies, because I think I look at the motor vehicle organisations and they've been partnering with startups for many years. They've been quicker to sort of embrace that sort of cultural change.
Mm-hmm. And taking that sort of wired view in terms of looking further into the future, what can we expect around the point when the cost of transporting energy becomes more expensive than generating it and storing it locally?
Yeah, that's, I suppose, the big one over the horizon, if you put your sort of chin up and see where it's coming, is the cost of actually transporting and moving electrons around through our transmission and distribution network. That's getting more and more expensive as we continue, and the cost of local generation and storage is still dramatically coming down. And there comes a point around, again, this is getting a little bit grey, but 2040, where we think that tipping point will occur. So it'll be cheaper to generate and store locally in a microgrid or in your local community than it will be just for the cost of transporting energy, let alone generation of the energy in the first place. And that's what I think when at that point is sort of the fundamental switch from what has been a very energy system that's not changed, has been centrally driven, centrally managed for since the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm. And probably sort of final question from myself. As we sort of go into this future, we've roughly talked around sort of 3 different areas around off-grid technology, EVs, and sort of local generation in that far off sort of future. Which one of these is going to make the biggest difference to consumers and industry?
It's a great question. I think the final tipping point when we're really operating that world, and there's some great examples, Low 3, etc. in Brooklyn. You may have heard of those sort of microgrid projects, and they're popping up now with regular occurrence in different countries around the world. I think that's the point where we have a fundamental shifts happened in the way we generate, store, consume, share energy. And I think that's sort of the really exciting thing is that change is coming. A lot of the stuff that was discussed, not just this morning, but also there's our man Jans with the bags, chucking bags around. A good prop, by the way, chucking a bag into the audience. I should have done that, wake everyone up. But that's a quite exciting thing, because actually you get into a place there where all the things that we know needs to be true actually can be true. We can move away from this nasty sort of CO2 generating energy to something that's much more clean, much more local, and hopefully cheaper for everyone as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's definitely a lot to come. Rob Doepel, partner and head of energy at EY, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you.